It's not that anything is wrong.
That's actually the thing that's wrong.
You've run the inventory. You've done it 100 times, usually somewhere between 6 p.m. Sunday and the moment you finally fall asleep. The salary is reasonable.
You're not being bullied. The commute is manageable.
Your colleagues are, by most measures, fine. Nobody is making your life actively miserable. And you know that there are people with genuinely terrible jobs who would find your quiet desperation offensive. And that knowledge is its own particular kind of loneliness.
Because you can't complain. You don't have the receipt for this feeling.
Every time you try to explain it to someone, it comes out wrong.
I just don't know. It's just
nothing. I'm just tired.
You are present at your job the way a houseplant is present in a room. Technically there, technically alive,
growing in no discernible direction.
And the part that is starting to scare you is the slow creep of a thought. What if this is just what working feels like?
What if I'm the problem? You are not the problem, but you are living inside a specific kind of mismatch that almost no one has given you the language for. And that language is what this video is about. There's a body of research in occupational psychology that has been quietly accumulating since the 1950s. Researchers call it person-environment fit in the literature. The basic idea is simple. How well does this job fit you? Not your CV, not your skills.
Your values, your needs, the specific conditions under which you come alive.
But here's where it gets precise, and where most workplace conversations miss the point entirely.
Fit doesn't break down in one place.
It breaks down in two.
There's needs fit whether your job is meeting your psychological needs day to day. And there's values fit whether what the organization is optimizing for is actually what you believe matters.
You can have one without the other.
You can work somewhere that pays well, treats you fairly, and never asks you to do anything genuinely objectionable.
Needs fit, basically intact, and still feel that hollow Sunday feeling, because the values fit is quietly, chronically wrong.
Because every day you're solving problems that don't feel worth solving.
Building things that don't feel worth building, contributing to a direction you never consciously chose. In the 1980s, two psychologists named Edward Deci and Richard Ryan developed a theory called self-determination theory. They were trying to understand what actually motivates human beings at the level of biology, not management strategy. What they found was that humans have three core psychological needs that, when chronically unmet, produce a very specific kind of suffering. The need for autonomy to feel like your actions are genuinely yours. The need for competence to feel like you're growing, not just completing. And the need for relatedness to feel like your work connects you to something and someone beyond the task itself. When those needs go unmet, you don't burn out dramatically.
You don't collapse.
You just gray out. Like a screen left on too long without input. The gray out is quiet.
It doesn't give you a story to tell.
It doesn't give you permission to leave. It just drains the color from the hours while leaving the hours completely intact. And here's what that raises the question we need to go deeper on. If this is a mismatch between who you are and where you put yourself, then the question isn't just why does the job feel wrong? The question is, how did you end up here without noticing it was wrong at the time?
There is a concept in developmental psychology called identity foreclosure.
It describes what happens when a person commits to an identity, a role, a career path, a self before they've actually had the chance to explore who they are. Not because they were forced to, but because the path was clear, the expectations were legible, the approval was available, and it felt like choosing, even though it was mostly following the groove that had already been cut. Think about how you arrived in this career. Not the professional version of that story, the CV version, but the actual version. The one where you trace it back to the specific moment when the decision was made.
Was it a decision you made from a full and curious sense of yourself? Or was it more like, this was what made sense to the people around me?
This was what I was good at, and being good at it was how I received love.
This path was open. It had a name people recognized. It didn't require me to explain myself.
Because for a lot of people who end up feeling this particular kind of great successful on paper, quietly suffocating in practice, the career was chosen for very intelligent reasons that had almost nothing to do with who they actually are. You chose stability because you grew up where instability was frightening. You chose the prestigious path because you grew up where reputation was the family's central nervous system. You chose the path that got the approval because you were a child who understood that the approval wasn't unconditional. And so you built a career out of earning what should have been freely given. None of that is pathology. All of that is intelligence. You read the room. You played it well. You built a life that worked on the terms that were available. The problem is that the terms have shifted.
You are no longer 12. The people whose approval organize your early choices may not even be watching anymore. But you are still living inside the architecture you built for them, still solving problems they would have respected, still optimizing for metrics they would have understood.
And you don't yet have a word for the person who exists beneath all of that scaffolding. Here is what the PE mismatch is actually protecting, underneath the Sunday feeling.
It is protecting you from having to answer a question that is genuinely terrifying. If I stopped doing what I'm good at, and what other people find legible, if I stripped away the title, and the salary, and the role, what would actually be left? Is there someone under there who knows what they want? Or have I been performing myself for so long that the performer and the person have become indistinguishable?
The grey out is uncomfortable, but it is also safe. It lets you feel that something is wrong without requiring you to go looking for what would be right. And right, whatever that means for you, specifically, is far more frightening than fine. I'm not going to tell you to quit. I'm not going to tell you to stay.
I don't know your circumstances, and neither of those things addresses what we've been talking about anyway.
Here is the one thing.
The PE mismatch, the grey out produced by chronic values, misfit runs on a very specific kind of silence.
A silence about what you actually want. Not what you're qualified for. Not what's available. Not what makes sense to the people in your life. What you specifically want from the part of you that existed before the scaffolding went up. Most people, when they try to access that, hit a wall.
Because they've been translating their desires into what's achievable for so long that the raw desire has gone quiet.
It doesn't speak in normal language anymore.
But it still speaks.
Just in a different register.
The exercise is this.
Not a journal prompt. Not a values assessment. Something more precise.
Think about the last time you lost track of time doing something.
Not in the "I was so anxious I disassociated" sense. The other kind, the kind where an hour passed and felt like 20 minutes. And when you surfaced, you were more alive than when you started. It doesn't have to be work-related. It probably won't be. It might be embarrassingly simple. Cooking something.
Explaining something to someone.
Building something with your hands. Reading a certain kind of book. Being in a certain kind of conversation.
Now, sit with it, not to mine it for career insights. Not to turn it into a LinkedIn pivot, but to ask one question. What need was being met in that moment that is being starved in my work?
Autonomy. Were you choosing every step of what you were doing? Or were you executing someone else's parameters? Competence. Were you at the edge of your ability, genuinely stretched, not just busy?
Or were you completing tasks you mastered 3 years ago? Relatedness. Did what you were doing feel connected to something that matters to you? Or was it a transaction with no one on the other end?
You don't need to change your job today to answer that question.
You don't need to answer it once and be done.
What you need to do is stop letting the grey out stay nameless.
Because the grey out stays powerful exactly as long as it stays vague. Give it a specific need.
Name which of the three is missing.
Because a nameless ache is a fog you live inside. A named need is a problem you can begin to negotiate with.
This is what PE fit theory is ultimately about, not whether your job is objectively good or bad, but whether it is meeting the needs that make you a person and not just a function. And the first step toward negotiating for those needs is knowing which specific ones you've been asking yourself to go without. You are going to go back to work tomorrow.
Probably the same desk, the same Slack notifications, the same meetings that could have been emails.
None of that changes today. But here is what I hope is different, or at least beginning to be different. The grey out has a name now. It is not a character flaw. It is not ingratitude. It is not evidence that you are broken in some way that other people aren't.
It is the entirely predictable result of a person living in a sustained mismatch between who they are, the person under the scaffolding, and what they've been asking that person to do in exchange for safety.
That person under the scaffolding has been patient.
Remarkably patient. They've been sending signals, the Sunday feeling, the grey hours, the vague want that has no object, and you've been explaining those signals away. Because you didn't have the language for them, and because the cost of listening felt too high. The cost of not listening is also high.
It's just slower and quieter, and it asks you to pay it in years rather than in a single difficult conversation with yourself. So here is the question I want you to carry, not to answer now, not even to answer soon, but to let live inside you until it shows you something. What would you be building right now with the same intelligence, the same discipline, the same capacity you've spent all these years developing if the person you were at 12 had been allowed to want what they actually wanted?
That question doesn't have a quick answer. It might make you uncomfortable for days.
Good. The discomfort is the conversation starting that should have started years ago. It's not the problem. It's the beginning of the way through.